My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 30 years old, and I learned that grief is expensive when the wrong people get their hands on your paperwork. My grandfather didn't leave me a lesson in a letter or a speech at a holiday table. He left me something more practical, an estate plan, clean and clear, built like a bridge from one generation to the next. He always believed in clarity in money, clarity in promises, clarity in who you are when no one is watching. His house in Northern California had a view of oak trees and a kitchen table that never stopped collecting documents. Property tax statements, newspaper clippings, legal pads with tidy handwriting. Even his shopping list looked like a court exhibit. He trusted systems because he understood how quickly people could lie when there was something to gain. I loved him for that. I also loved him because he was the only adult in my childhood who treated me like my choices belonged to me. When I moved to Seattle for grad school and then stayed for a career in project management, he celebrated the distance, like it was proof I was building my own life. My mother called it abandonment. My grandfather called it adulthood. He died in early spring, a quiet morning with a nurse nearby, and a window cracked open for air. I flew down within hours. The house felt smaller without his voice, but the work of death started immediately. Notifications, paperwork, relatives appearing from nowhere with their memories and their opinions. I expected sadness. I expected the strange numbness that follows a funeral. I didn't expect a coordinated financial raid. The will was solid. The trust was funded. The beneficiaries were listed. I was not the only heir, but I was a major one. My grandfather's estate was worth a little over $1 million when you combine the house equity, a brokerage account, and a few smaller assets. That number sounds dramatic in the abstract. In real life, it was a lifetime of careful decisions. It was not lottery money. It was my grandfather's discipline made tangible. It was also exactly the kind of thing that brings out a certain type of hunger. My mother arrived at the house the same day I did, wearing black and a face built for attention. She cried loudly for the first 5 minutes, then started reorganizing the kitchen like grief came with managerial authority. My Uncle Dean arrived the next day with a suitcase and a tone that implied he had been wronged by time itself. My cousin Lexi arrived with a boyfriend and a camera, documenting every moment like it was content. I felt the shift quickly. Not just sadness, strategy. My grandfather's attorney, Martin Reyes, met us in his office 2 days after the funeral. Martin had been my grandfather's attorney for years. Calm voice, crisp suits, and the kind of eyes that noticed every detail. He reviewed the basics with us: the trust structure, the pour-over will, the executor responsibilities, the timeline for probate-adjacent filings. My grandfather had set things up to avoid the worst of probate delays. But there were still formal steps. There was still process. Process is where people hide things. I watched my mother closely as Martin spoke. She nodded at the right times, then glanced at my uncle like they shared a private agreement. My stomach tightened. Martin distributed copies of the key documents and instructions for next steps. He emphasized that the trust distribution would occur after certain notices, tax filings, and the sale or transfer of the house. I left the office with a folder and a tired kind of hope. At least the plan existed. At least the plan would protect what my grandfather intended. I was wrong about one thing. A plan protects you only if the institutions follow it, and institutions follow whatever paperwork arrives first. 2 weeks later, I started noticing small fractures. A voicemail from a bank I didn't recognize. An email from a property management company. A final notice letter that made no sense, addressed to the estate. I called Martin. Martin sounded surprised, but not alarmed. Sometimes institutions send automated notices after a death record hits certain databases, he noted. Forward anything you receive. I forwarded everything. Then I received a call from the county recorder's office. A clerk with a practical tone confirmed my name and address, and then mentioned a deed-related filing that had been submitted for review. A deed-related filing on my grandfather's house. My breath stalled. The house was held in the trust. The trust owned the property. No one should have been filing anything new without Martin. I requested more information and got a simple response. A quitclaim deed had been submitted, transferring the property from the trust to an individual, to my uncle, Dean. I felt the air leave my lungs. A quitclaim deed does not guarantee clean title, but it can create chaos. It can slow things down. It can force a legal fight. It can give someone leverage. I drove straight to Martin's office with the paperwork. Martin's face tightened as he read. "This did not come through my office," he noted. Martin made calls. The recorder's office confirmed the submission was pending, flagged due to missing supporting trust documentation. Martin requested an immediate hold and submitted a notice of dispute. The hold was granted. I exhaled for the first time in an hour. Then my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "Why are you complicating things? Dean needs stability. He has children. Dean has no children. Dean has a motorcycle and an ego." My mother's phrasing wasn't a mistake. It was a tactic. Exaggerate need, rewrite facts, demand compliance. I didn't respond. Martin explained the next move. We file a formal objection and request the recorder's office preserve all submitted copies and any associated identity records. Identity records. Because quitclaim deeds require signatures, notary stamps, and sometimes identification logs. And those logs are where truth lives. The next escalation arrived as a tax problem. I received a letter from the IRS addressed to the estate's tax ID, referencing an incomplete filing and warning of penalties. The date on the letter was wrong. The tax period referenced was wrong. The signature line listed a tax preparer my grandfather had never used. Someone had filed something. Poorly. On purpose. I forwarded it to Martin. Martin's response arrived quickly. "Do not communicate with the IRS directly yet. We route through the proper channels, confirm any filings, and preserve evidence." Preserve evidence. That phrase became the rhythm of my life. Within days, Martin's office confirmed it. A tax return had been filed under the estate's tax ID, listing my uncle as fiduciary and requesting an expedited refund to a new bank account. A refund. There was no refund expected. The filing was a fishing net. If the IRS processed anything, money could leak out before we could stop it. Even a small amount would establish a pattern. Martin contacted the IRS fraud line and submitted a form to flag the estate account. He submitted another form to change the mailing address for the estate's IRS correspondence to his office, removing my mother's ability to intercept mail. He also advised me to lock down my own identity, because people who exploit estates often exploit living relatives too. Credit freeze, bank alerts, two-factor authentication, new email for financial accounts, a safe deposit box for documents. I built a fortress while still mourning. Grief doesn't pause for logistics, but logistics can hijack grief. The third move was the one that explained everything. The estate's brokerage account was supposed to remain frozen until distribution, with Martin's office handling the process. I received a notice that the account had a pending transfer request. I contacted the brokerage's estate department. After verification, the representative confirmed a request had been submitted to transfer the account into a new estate management account under my uncle's control for simplified administration. Simplified administration. That phrase was poison wrapped in sugar. The representative confirmed receipt of executor authority documentation and a signature page authorizing the transfer. A signature page. The representative could not send it directly to me, but could send it to Martin's office. Martin received it and called me immediately. "Claire, this is falsified," he noted. The document was a counterfeit letters testamentary sheet, the kind of court issues in formal probate. But my grandfather's trust structure meant we were not in that process in the same way. The court seal was wrong. The case number was fabricated. The document referenced an outdated county format. Someone had built a fake court identity. The point wasn't subtle theft. The point was delay. If they could delay distribution long enough, they could drain the estate through expenses, legal fees, property maintenance, and withdrawals disguised as administration costs. They could also pressure me to settle by giving them more than my grandfather intended, simply to end the nightmare. Delay is leverage. That was the whole strategy. The $1 million probate delay wasn't an accident. It was a business plan. I needed a spine made of paper. I took time off work and flew back down. I moved into my grandfather's house temporarily, not because I wanted to live in it, but because presence matters. Presence keeps mail from disappearing. Presence keeps strangers from entering. Presence keeps narratives from forming without you. My mother hated my presence. She arrived 3 days later with grocery bags and a forced smile, acting like she was doing me a favor. She walked into the house without knocking, like it was still her father's house and therefore hers. I met her at the doorway and blocked her path. No unannounced visits, I noted. Her face tightened. I am your mother. I am an adult, I noted. Her eyes flicked to the living room, where my grandfather's framed photos hung. She was looking for emotional leverage. You can't just cut out family, she pressed. I am not cutting out family, I noted. I am cutting out fraud. Her expression shifted into the kind of outrage that pretends innocence. Fraud. Listen to you. Grief has made you paranoid. Paranoid. Another favorite tactic. Label the person who notices patterns as unstable, so the patterns can continue. I didn't argue. I opened my phone and showed her the county recorder's dispute confirmation and the IRS fraud flag number. Her face changed. Not guilt. Calculation. She realized the system was awake. Fine, she pressed, voice sweet again. Let's just settle this. Dean wants the house. You want cash. Everyone wins. Everyone wins. That phrase meant, accept the theft. Call it compromise. No, I noted. Her tone hardened. You are ruining your family. My family is not a license to commit crimes in my name, I noted. Then I closed the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't dramatize it. I closed it like a boundary. Martin moved fast once the pattern was clear. He filed an emergency petition to the court for a formal protective order over estate administration, even though the trust structure reduced probate exposure. The petition requested official recognition of Martin's office as the point of contact for all institutions, plus a court warning against fraudulent filings under the estate's identity. He also contacted the county recorder's fraud unit and submitted the forged quitclaim deed materials as evidence, including the notary stamp. The notary stamp mattered. Notary logs are the graveyard of lies. Within a week, the notary's journal was requested. The signature on the deed submission did not match the journal. The identification number used did not match my uncle's ID. The notary's description of the signer, middle-aged female, not my uncle, my mother. Martin also uncovered a second filing attempt, a successor trustee change form submitted to the brokerage, naming my mother as trustee due to incapacity of current trustee. Incapacity. Another tactic. If they could claim Martin was incapacitated, they could swap him out like a broken part. The form was rejected because Martin's office had already placed an internal security flag with the brokerage's estate department. Security flags. They sound small. They save lives. The house became the next battleground. My uncle tried to move in. Not quietly, not politely, with a moving truck. I came home from a meeting with a locksmith and found his truck in the driveway, boxes stacked on the porch. My uncle stood there with his arms crossed, wearing a grin that was pure entitlement. I didn't engage his grin. I called Martin and put him on speaker. Martin's voice came through clear and professional. Dean, you have no legal authority to occupy this property. The trust holds title. Any attempt to enter or remove property will be reported as trespass and potential theft. My uncle scoffed. Your lawyer is manipulating you, he pressed. You're young. You don't understand. I'm keeping the house in the family. The family. Always the family. My grandfather was family too, and his wishes were written down. I stepped forward and held up the printed trust summary page Martin had prepared, with the key clause highlighted. My uncle's smile faltered. My mother's car appeared at the curb like a summoned demon. She got out fast, face already built for performance. Neighbors watched from porches. Perfect. My mother loved witnesses when she thought she would win. She launched into tears and accusations, claiming I was stealing, claiming I was heartless, claiming my grandfather would be ashamed. I didn't respond with emotion. I responded with a camera. I recorded the entire interaction, calmly, visibly. My mother froze when she realized. The performance changed shape. She lowered her voice. "Stop recording, this is family." "Exactly," I noted. "Family should not need forged deeds." The neighbors shifted. My uncle backed toward the truck. My mother moved closer, voice tight. "You want to embarrass us. I want you to stop," I noted. Then I contacted the sheriff's non-emergency line and reported an attempted unauthorized occupancy of trust property. The deputies arrived within 20 minutes. Paperwork beats outrage. My uncle's moving truck left. My mother's car left. The driveway went quiet again. I sat on the porch steps and stared at the oak trees until my breathing slowed. The months that followed were a slow grind of protection. Mail forwarding to Martin's office. Locks changed, security system installed, a list of allowed vendors, a written protocol with the property insurer. We also moved the estate's liquid assets into a court-acknowledged restricted account that required 2 approvals. Martin and an independent co-trustee my grandfather had named as backup, a retired accountant named Mrs. Alvarez. Mrs. Alvarez wasn't family. That was the point. Family can be compromised. Systems need neutral guardians. Mrs. Alvarez took her role seriously. She reviewed every outgoing expense. She refused vague invoices. She demanded receipts. My mother attempted to submit reimbursement requests anyway. Gas receipts? Grocery receipts. A caregiver fee for emotional labor. Emotional labor. My mother tried to bill the estate for grief. Mrs. Alvarez rejected every one. The distribution timeline stabilized, but my mother didn't stop trying to create delay. A new filing appeared, a claim that my grandfather had outstanding personal debts to my uncle. A promissory note attached. The note looked old. It also looked fake. Martin investigated. The signatures didn't match. The witnesses didn't exist. The notary stamp was from a notary who had retired 10 years ago. My mother was desperate. Desperation makes sloppy forgeries. Each attempt created more evidence. Each piece of evidence tightened the legal net. 6 months after my grandfather's death, we reached the point my mother had been trying to prevent: scheduled distribution. The house would be sold because none of us wanted to co-own property with people willing to forge documents. The market was strong. The sale would provide clean division. My mother tried to block the sale with one last move: a temporary restraining order request, claiming family hardship and a promise from my grandfather that she could live there. There was no such promise. There was no document. There was only her narrative. Narratives die in court. We appeared at the hearing. Martin presented the trust, the distribution plan, and the record of fraudulent filings and rejected claims. He presented the notary journal discrepancy. He presented the attempted brokerage transfer. He presented the incapacity claim against him. The judge's expression stayed flat, but the patience in the room disappeared. The request was denied. The judge also issued a warning: further fraudulent filings could result in criminal referral. Criminal referral. The phrase landed like thunder. My mother's face went pale. My uncle looked down at his shoes. For the first time, they looked less like family members and more like people who had made a terrible bet. They bet I would collapse. They bet grief would make me pliable. They bet delay would exhaust me. They underestimated my stubbornness and my love for systems. The sale closed 3 weeks later. The funds moved into the restricted account. The final tax filings were completed. The distribution checks were prepared. $1 million doesn't arrive as a suitcase of cash. It arrives as a quiet deposit, structured and taxed and documented. My share hit my account on a Tuesday. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a coffee shop and stared at the balance. It was real. It was also heavy. Because behind that deposit sat months of conflict, betrayal, and the collapse of the illusion that family means safety. My mother didn't contact me that day. She waited. She always waited for the moment of relief so she could step in and claim credit. A week later, a letter arrived at my Seattle address. A typed letter from my mother. She wrote about forgiveness and family unity and how stress makes people act out. She wrote that everyone had suffered and that it was time to move forward. At the bottom, she included a proposal, a repayment request, not for a debt, for family restoration. Amount requested, $200,000. $200,000. My hands went cold as I read it. My mother wasn't ashamed. My mother was still hungry. She had failed to steal the estate through delay, so she tried to extract the money directly through guilt. She would never stop if she believed the door might open. I folded the letter and placed it in my evidence folder because I still believed in documentation, even when the fight felt over. Then I wrote one email to Martin. No further contact, no negotiation. I want a formal no-contact letter. Martin drafted it within an hour. The letter stated that all future communication must occur through counsel, and any harassment would be documented and escalated. I printed it and kept a copy. Then I did something that felt both simple and enormous. I changed my phone number. Not because I was running, because I was closing a channel. A year after my grandfather's death, I returned to the house one last time. It belonged to a new family now. Kids' bikes rested on the porch. New curtains hung in the windows. The oak trees still stood, indifferent and steady. I didn't go inside. I stood at the edge of the driveway and let myself remember my grandfather's laugh and his quiet pride and his insistence on clarity. He had tried to protect me with documents. He succeeded, but only because I protected the documents too. That was the real inheritance, not the money, the lesson. Systems matter, boundaries matter, names on paper matter. Delays are not always accidents. Sometimes delays are weapons. I'm 30. I'm an American woman, and I will never again underestimate what people will do when they think your grief makes you weak. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document. I learned to read every delay like a message. A missing form is not always a mistake. A sudden request for a signature is not always routine. A new bank account is not always convenience. Every shortcut is a question. Every question deserves a document.